my job is to prepare people first and foremost with their skills. And as Gordon pointed out earlier, if you're in any way a rational human being and you're noticing that you're getting tremendous success with a given move in the gym against high-level opponents who give a good read on what your actual opponent in a competition is like, you would have to be a moron to not recognize that kind of success and say, this is something I should be building into my game, and you will carry the confidence that you earned in the gym into the arena. So I never try to use reverse psychology. I build up everything I do in terms of confidence is to give people physical skills. I know people say, oh, there's physicality on the one hand, there's mentality on the other, and confidence is squarely in the mental aspect of the game. But all the underpinnings and beginnings of confidence are physical. Okay, a rational human being will see where they're having success and where they're having failure. And confidence will surround those areas where they're having success and will degenerate in cases where they're having failure. So my job as a coach is to set them up for success in the gym with a given set of skills. And I don't have to do anything psychologically after that. If I can set you up to be highly successful with a given move or a set of tactics 10 times in a row against quality opposition in the gym, I don't have to do a damn thing when it comes to instilling confidence. I will tell people, hey, you're doing a really good job with that move. It's working well for you. But when they nod in agreement, I'm not trying to force anything on them. They already recognize that long before the words came out of my mouth. But on the other hand, intelligent, rational people will recognize when they're failing with given moves, and no amount of talk on my part can ever change that. If I teach Gordon a given arm lock, and 15 times in a row he tries it over a month, and all 15 are failures, there's nothing I can say verbally to come up to Gordon and say, hey, you're really good at that move. He's going to look at me and say, bullshit, I'm terrible at it. And that will create a crisis of confidence where Gordon no longer believes the words coming out of my mouth. So I will never compromise that.
But isn't there a line? You just said 15. You have to believe that doing this arm lock 15 times over a period of a month is worth it, because eventually you might get it. Like,
yeah, that's a separate issue. That's a separate issue. There are times where I've more or less pushed athletes to go in a certain direction. For example, when I first met Garry Tonon, he never had a guillotine strangle. And I would say to him, Garry, you're a scrambler. Like, one of the greatest weapons a scrambler can ever develop is a guillotine. Like, it should be in your arsenal. And he was like, no, I just scramble for the back. And I said, well, there's going to be a day you can't take someone's back. And it's always good to be able to strangle from front and back. Okay, of course, we all prefer strangles from the back. That makes sense. But there's going to come a day where it's going to be useful for you. And so that was one of the few times where I put my foot down and said, you're learning this, shut the fuck up. And
he literally wouldn't teach him anything else until he got a guillotine. Garry would ask him a question. He's like, let's see your guillotine.
And for the first 3 months, as gifted as Garry Tonon is in learning most moves, Garry gets it in minutes. There was something going on with Garry, just couldn't get a guillotine on people. And finally, after around 3 months, he started having some success until ultimately it became one of his best weapons. We had to go through 15 different variations of guillotine until he found one which actually worked reliably for him. And that was one of the few times where I put my foot down and said, no, you have to learn this.
So the long search had to do more with the physical characteristics. You couldn't figure out the right
it made sense. It made sense in the case of Garry Tonon because there were more opportunities per minute of his grappling for guillotines. That the investment in time was worth it. For another athlete, I might have said, well, he hardly ever gets in the situation for front and headlocks or guillotine, so it's not even worth investing the training time.
Let me ask you a question on the competition side. We mentioned haters, and do you think about this aspect of the competition with the athletes?
It's a great question, and the answer is no. You can see that you could you couldn't find two more polar opposites psychologically than George St. Pierre and this monstrosity on my left. And I've never said to my athletes, "Hey, I think this is the sort of demeanor you should carry yourself with." I'm myself a very flawed character, and I'm the last person on earth who should be delving out moral advice to other people. The only thing is that I of course, I believe some things are off limits, but as long as it's done in the context of sport where no one's physically attacking people or doing anything crazy where it just goes completely over the top, then I give almost zero moral advice to my athletes. I'm a jiu-jitsu coach, not a preacher.
Lex, if I may, we are entertainers. We're athletes, we're professional athletes, but we make a living because of people want to see us perform. Same thing an actor, same thing a singer. And a lot of the time, especially in the fight game, an event is promoted. It needs to be with emotion. Love me, hate me, but do not ignore me. And when it's authentic and it's done well, I think personally, my favorite fighters to watch are the ones that have some sort of a bad persona. I really enjoyed watching those guys because they bring an emotion element into a fight, which is great. I feel, to me, it's more interesting to watch when there is an emotion involved. And I believe that's why some fighters make more money than others. You know what I mean? That's the reason why we can make a living out of this.
Yeah, they're better entertainers, but you're right. The authenticity seems to be really important there.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually something very interesting there. It's time to break out some secrets. Do you know who, like you think of George St. Pierre, you think of like the highly technical, polished martial artist.
Oh, this is going to be great.
Do you know who his favorite fighters to watch were? You'd probably be thinking, probably someone who's really technically advanced. Actually, it was Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, and Phil Baroni. He used to love watching that. That was a Hammer House. That was his favorite. He would love those guys. And whenever their fights were on, George would be watching the Hammer House crew. And it's funny what you said about how those guys brought an intensity to MMA that was off the charts. Have you ever met those guys in their prime? Let me tell you, it was something to behold. And they had this crazy, larger than life personality. Most of the things they did made no sense whatsoever. But
I mean, technically,
but that was their appeal.
Yeah.
And there were these guys, and George loved to watch them more than anyone else.
You never knew what could happen with these guys. I remember when Mark Coleman won the Pride Grand Prix. I was in my living room. I was jumping. I was so happy. I was like, yeah! He beat Igor Vorchevchin. I was like, to me, it was amazing. You know what I mean? Because of the emotion that they brought into the fight.
George, I was actually very interested by something you said there. Normally, when I ask what is the appeal of a given fighter and what makes people watch a fight, you talked about the idea that fighters are entertainers, and that's absolutely correct. They are. It's this weird industry where you're both an athlete and an entertainer, and you need to be successful in both regards to become financially successful. Insofar as your favorite athletes to watch, at least, were people who are almost like the polar opposite of who you are. I've always said that most people, if you look at, say, 1 million people watch a pay-per-view event, what percentage of those 1 million people have a genuine technical understanding of what's happening as they watch a fight? It's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. The vast majority of people who watch a professional fight have almost no technical understanding of what's going on in front of them. So how do they relate to the fight? What's the only way they can? It's through emotion. And so when they get a sense that these two don't like each other, then they can relate to the fight. but only a tiny percentage of people watching a given professional fight can relate to it on a technical level. The overwhelming majority will always form an emotional attachment to the fight. That's why when you see shows like UFC Primetime, they never focus on the tactics and the techniques of the fight. They focus on the emotional elements, the preparation, the view of their own family members as athletes get ready. It's always an emotional pull, because that's how 99% of the viewers relate to the fight. Think about chess, okay? If I have minimal knowledge of two world champions coming to fight each other or match up against each other in a game of chess, I know so little about chess tactics, and I can't really form any kind of technical appreciation of what's going on the board. But if you tell me that these two chess players hate each other's guts and they've got a rivalry which goes back 5 years and they've said this and that about each other in public, then suddenly my ears prick up and I'm like, oh, okay, this sounds interesting. Because I just don't have the knowledge to appreciate what's going on the board in a chess game, to be able to appreciate the technical nuances of what they're doing. So any interest that I have in the chess match is going to have to come from some kind of emotional level, because I'm just not qualified to make technical assessments. And that's exactly how it is in the case of both grappling and mixed martial arts. That's why the ones who evoke the most attention are always the ones who can form some kind of emotional appeal. Conor McGregor was the all-time master of this.
I believe also emotion can be used as a weapon. For example, I've learned this from my favorite boxer is Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard, I remember, I was very young, so I watched his fight later when I was older, but I know that Sugar Ray Leonard was the best boxer of his era, to me personally. And I don't think nobody could beat him. I think he was skill-wise, he was the best. However, when he fought in Montreal, Roberto Duran made it in a way that Leonard became very emotional. He wanted to stand in front of Duran and fight a different fight that he normally does, because he wanted to show that he's a man. And he lost that fight, which was a mistake. So by then later on, he beat Roberto Duran quite easy. You know, everybody remember the no mask thing. But my point is, emotion can be used in a way that it can make derail your opponent out of his game plan. And I felt a lot of my opponent trying to do that with me. So that's why I never got involved. That was my way to defend myself against some kind of bullying, to put like a shield in front. But some other guy like Gordon, he expressed himself differently. Of course, there's a language barrier, but for him, he's better at giving back. He's a better counter-attacker. You know, that's the way he responds to the aggression of an emotional attack. I think everybody is different in that regard.
What's interesting that John said that he doesn't study the tactics of this game, or maybe you're not interested in the tactics of this game, because it seems like this is more than just being an entertainer. It seems like it could be an effective part of the match.
Yeah, I just feel like whatever investment you make in that it's going to get negligible rewards. First of all, it's probably only going to pertain to one match in front of you rather than the totality of your career. And whatever gains you get out of psychological trickery and play typically don't last long. You raised an excellent example with Sugar Ray Leonard. He did fight outside of his usual manner in that regard. But rather than me try to tell someone, hey, behave like this before a fight, I would have been probably more forceful between rounds with an athlete and say, no, you're fighting this fight the wrong way. And that would have a much more beneficial impact on my athlete than psychological trickery before a fight.